Greg Porter stared at the blinking red light on the communications panel. 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days. That's how long the distress signal had been broadcasting into the empty darkness of space. That's how long New Haven Colony had been waiting for a response from Earth. Greg rubbed his tired eyes and looked through the viewport at the settlement below. 5,000 people lived here now, building lives on this distant world despite being cut off from home. The colony had grown since the wormhole collapse that isolated them from Earth's shipping lanes. Fields of blue-green crops surrounded clusters of prefabricated buildings and newer structures made from local materials. They had adapted and survived. Still watching that like Greg, Lisa Ward entered the communications center, carrying 2 steaming cups. The chief engineer handed one to Greg and leaned against the console. "Someone has 2, he said, accepting the drink gratefully. "In case Earth answers." Lisa's expression softened with pity. "It's been over 3 years. If they could reach us, they would have by now." Greg knew she was probably right. New Haven was humanity's farthest colony, established 30 years ago as a symbol of exploration and progress. Now it was a symbol of abandonment. The wormhole that once connected them to Earth's shipping routes had collapsed during a solar flare. The colony's long-range transmitter had been broadcasting a distress signal ever since. "The council meeting starts in 20 minutes, Lisa reminded him. "People are scared about the scanner readings." The scanner readings. Greg felt a weight settle in his stomach. 6 months ago, their long-range sensors had detected something approaching their system. 3 months ago, they confirmed it was a fleet of ships, not human ships. "I'll be there," Greg promised. Lisa left, and Greg took one final look at the communications panel before following her. He had been elected colonial administrator after the collapse. These people were his responsibility now. The council chamber was already full when Greg arrived. Representatives from each section of the colony sat around the circular table. Patrick Miller, head of colony security, stood at the display screen, pointing to several blinking dots. "They're definitely slowing down," Patrick said. "The alien fleet will reach our orbit in approximately 2 weeks." "Have they responded to our greeting messages?" asked Susan Cooper, the colony's doctor. Patrick shook his head. "Nothing. They've received them. Our scanners confirm transmission reception, but they're not answering." Worried murmurs filled the room. Greg raised his hand for silence. "What are our options?" he asked. Patrick looked grim. "We have 3 shuttles with minimal weapons systems. The colony has 42 security officers with standard firearms. We've been retrofitting mining equipment, but..." He trailed off. Everyone understood. They had nothing that could stand against a space fleet. "We should prepare evacuation plans to the caves in the northern mountains," suggested Rosa Diaz, who managed the colony's agriculture. "And if they can track heat signatures?" someone asked. The discussion continued for hours. Plans were made, contingencies discussed. But everyone in the room knew the truth. If these aliens came with hostile intentions, New Haven had little chance of defending itself. 2 weeks later, Greg stood with Lisa and Patrick at the observation post outside the main settlement. The night sky above New Haven looked different now. 12 dark shapes moved across the stars, massive ships entering orbit around their world. "What do we know about them?" Greg asked quietly. "They call themselves the Corvins," Patrick replied. "We intercepted some communications. From what we can tell, they're expanding through this sector. Other worlds that refused to submit were conquered." Lisa gripped the railing. "Then we fight." Greg watched as smaller craft began to descend from the capital ships. "Dropships," he guessed. "Send the message to all sections. Implement Defensive Plan Alpha. And..." He hesitated, looking back at the communications center where the distress signal still pulsed futilely into space. "Keep broadcasting to Earth." "No one is coming, Greg," Lisa said softly. "Maybe not," he admitted. "But until those ships reach the ground, I'm going to hope someone is listening." The bridge of the EDF Valiant hummed with activity. Screens displayed tactical information, ship statuses, and the positions of the 46 other vessels that made up Earth's Sixth Fleet. Admiral John Blackwell stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the final preparations. "Sir, all ships report ready status," said Commander Kate Russell. Her uniform bore the insignia of the Earth Defense Force's newest division, formed specifically for deep space operations. Blackwell nodded. "And the wormhole stabilizers?" "Operating at full capacity," Kate replied. "The science team confirms we can maintain a stable transit to the New Haven system." 9 months ago, Earth had finally received the distress signal from their farthest colony. The message had taken years to reach them through conventional space. Upon learning that New Haven still survived after the wormhole collapse, Earth's governments had immediately authorized a response. But assembling a rescue fleet capable of traveling such a vast distance had taken time. "Lieutenant Dixon, status of navigation systems?" Blackwell asked. Frank Dixon looked up from his console. "Wormhole jump coordinates are locked and verified, Admiral. We can depart on your command." Blackwell walked to the front viewport. The fleet represented Earth's most advanced military technology. Ships built with lessons learned from humanity's first encounters with alien civilizations. The Valiant alone carried enough firepower to level a continent. "Recent intelligence suggests the colony may be under threat," Blackwell said to his officers. "Our primary mission remains evacuation, but we are authorized to use necessary force to protect our people." He turned to face the bridge crew. "This is the farthest humanity has ever projected military power. If New Haven is indeed under attack, this will be our first major combat operation against an alien adversary. I expect each of you to perform your duties with the excellence that brought you to this fleet." The officers nodded solemnly. Many had family or friends who had lost contact with loved ones when New Haven was cut off. "Communications, send the fleet-wide message," Blackwell ordered. "We jump in 5 minutes." As the countdown began, Blackwell thought about the colonists who had been waiting for years, not knowing if Earth would ever answer their call. He had made them a promise. Though they couldn't hear it yet, no human colony would ever be abandoned again. "Jump sequence initiating," announced Dixon. All ships synchronized. The space before the fleet began to distort, twisting as the new wormhole generators created a stable passage across hundreds of light years. Unlike the natural wormhole that had collapsed and stranded New Haven, this artificial pathway was reinforced with technology developed specifically to prevent another disaster. Entering wormhole in 3, 2, 1. The Valiant shuddered slightly as it entered the swirling blue-white tunnel. Visual displays showed the rest of the fleet following in precise formation. The passage would take only minutes from their perspective, though external time would move differently. In the tactical center 1 level below the bridge, Major Sam Hayes briefed his Marine commanders. "Latest scans suggest an unknown fleet in orbit around New Haven. We're preparing for immediate deployment upon arrival." The officers studied the holographic display showing New Haven's surface. Intelligence had identified likely landing zones and defensive positions. "Our primary objective is securing the main settlement," Hayes continued. "The colony has approximately 5,000 civilians who will need evacuation or protection depending on the Admiral's assessment of the situation." Captain Ben Howard, who would lead the first wave to the surface, spoke up. "What do we know about these potential hostiles?" "Very little," Hayes admitted. "The Corvins are an expanding power in that sector. They've conquered several non-human worlds. This would be their first encounter with humans." The ship trembled again as it continued through the wormhole passage. Every person aboard knew they were making history, traveling farther and faster than any human military force before them. On the bridge, Blackwell watched the countdown timer for wormhole exit. "Stand by for arrival," he ordered. "All combat systems to ready status." The timer reached 0. Ahead, the wormhole began to open into normal space near New Haven's outer moon. Blackwell's expression hardened as initial scans started displaying information. "Battle stations," he said quietly. We have arrived. Patrick Miller crouched behind the barricade of farm equipment and metal sheets. 3 weeks had passed since the Corvin ships first appeared in the sky above New Haven. Now their ground forces were advancing toward the main settlement. "They're coming through the Eastern Valley," said Diane Foster, a former mining technician who had volunteered for Patrick's defense team. She handed him the binoculars. Patrick looked through them and frowned. The Corvins moved in organized groups, their armor gleaming in the morning light. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, with 4 arms and thick-plated skin. Their weapons fired bursts of blue energy that could melt through metal. "How many?" he asked. "I count about 60 in this group," Diane replied. "More behind them." Patrick passed the binoculars to the next lookout and activated his comm unit. "All units, they're approaching Sector 4. Remember the plan. Hit and run only. We can't match them in direct combat." The colonists had spent the last weeks preparing. They had converted mining lasers into weapons, built traps, and established a network of tunnels between buildings. It wasn't much against an invasion force, but it was all they had. In the community center, Susan Cooper directed volunteers as they set up hospital beds. "Move the surgery station closer to the back entrance," she instructed. "We need to be able to evacuate patients quickly if this position is compromised." Greg Porter entered carrying crates of medical supplies. "How's it looking?" he asked. Susan wiped sweat from her forehead. "We've got enough supplies for about 2 weeks if casualties are light." After that, she didn't finish the sentence. Greg set down the crates. "We've moved the children and elderly to the cave shelters. The Corvins haven't found them yet." "And you?" Susan asked. "Where will you be?" "With Patrick at the East Barricade," Greg replied. "The colony administrator should be on the front line." A loud explosion shook the building. Greg's comm unit crackled to life with Patrick's voice. "They've breached the outer perimeter. All units fall back to secondary positions." Greg looked at Susan. "Keep these people safe," he said, then hurried out. Outside, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Smoke rose from several buildings at the edge of the settlement. Colonists ran for cover as Corvin energy weapons fired overhead. Patrick's defense teams were falling back in small groups, using the buildings for cover. Greg reached Patrick's position behind an overturned transport vehicle. "How bad is it?" he asked. "Worse than we expected," Patrick replied, his face dirty and streaked with sweat. "They have some kind of energy shields our weapons can barely penetrate." Lisa Ward slid into position beside them, clutching a modified mining laser. "The north section is holding for now," she reported, "but not for long." "What about the communications center?" Greg asked. Lisa shook her head. "Still operational, but it doesn't matter. No one is coming, Greg." Another explosion rocked the ground. A group of colonists retreated past their position, one man dragging an injured woman. "We need to pull back to the central square," Patrick said. "We can hold them there longer." Greg looked at the advancing Corvins. Their tall forms moved with frightening efficiency between the colony buildings. This was no simple raid. They were here to take the planet. "Give the order," Greg said, "and send word to the cave shelters. If the central square falls, they need to go deeper into the cave system." As darkness began to fall, the defenders established a perimeter around the central square. The Corvins had stopped their advance temporarily, setting up positions around the settlement's edge. Greg stood at an observation post on top of the administration building, watching enemy campfires spread across the hills. Corvin dropships continued to land beyond the ridge, bringing more troops. Lisa joined him, her expression grim. "We counted their ships in orbit today. 12 large vessels, fully armed. Even if we somehow push back their ground forces, we can't touch them up there." Greg nodded silently. He knew the colony was living on borrowed time. "We should consider surrender terms," Lisa suggested quietly. "The reports from other worlds say the Corvins don't offer terms," Greg replied. "They want resources and labor. Those who resist are eliminated. Lisa looked up at the stars visible between the alien ships. Then we resist as long as we can. Greg took one last look at the enemy positions. Get some rest, he told her. Tomorrow will be harder. In the distance, a Corvan war horn sounded. A deep, vibrating call that echoed across the valley. The invasion's main push would begin at dawn. Dawn broke over New Haven with the sounds of battle. The Corvans had launched their main assault as promised, advancing on the central square from 3 directions. Colonial defenders fought desperately from makeshift barriers and building windows. Greg fired his converted mining laser at an approaching Corvan soldier. The beam hit the alien's energy shield, causing it to flicker but not fail. Patrick and his team had discovered it took 3 or 4 direct hits to break through their defenses. We're running low on power cells, Lisa shouted over the noise of battle. She crouched behind a metal barricade next to Greg, swapping out her weapon's depleted energy source. Greg checked his own weapon. The indicator showed less than 20% charge remaining. Fall back to the admin building when you have to, he ordered. We've reinforced the doors and windows. Around them, the situation grew worse by the minute. 2 of their defensive positions had already been overrun. Colonists retreated in small groups toward the center of the settlement, helping wounded comrades. In the community center, Susan and her medical team worked frantically to treat injuries. The makeshift hospital was filling with wounded faster than they could handle. More burn cases coming in, called a volunteer from the doorway. Susan looked up from the patient she was treating. Put them along the west wall. Start with cooling gel packs before bandaging. Above the planet, the 12 Corvan warships maintained their blockade formation. Their attention remained focused on the ground battle. None of their sensors were directed outward. Near the outer moon of New Haven, space itself seemed to tear open. A swirling blue-white circle of energy formed in the emptiness, expanding rapidly. Through this artificial wormhole, the first ships of Earth's 6th Fleet emerged, sleek destroyers with weapons already powered. On the bridge of the Corvan command ship, alarms suddenly blared. Overlord Vexkar rose from his command chair, his 4 arms gesturing furiously at the tactical display. Impossible, he growled in his native language. This system has been isolated. How could they have? 47 vessels of unknown configuration, interrupted his sensor officer. They're deploying in attack formation. Vexkar watched as more and more ships emerged from the wormhole. The last to appear was a massive dreadnought, dwarfing even his command vessel. Adjust blockade formation, he ordered. All ships prepare for space combat. But the Corvan fleet, spread thin around the planet for the blockade, could not reposition quickly enough. On the bridge of the EDF Valiant, Admiral Blackwell assessed the situation calmly. 12 enemy vessels, reported Commander Russell. Configuration unknown, but their weapon systems appear to be powering up. Colony status, Blackwell asked. Lieutenant Dixon checked his displays. Heavy fighting in the main settlement. Looks like the colonists are surrounded but still holding out. Blackwell nodded. Load targeting data for their forward vessels first. We need to punch a hole for our dropships. He turned to his communications officer. Establish contact with the colony if possible. In New Haven's communications center, the radio operator Hank Wilson had stayed at his post, despite the battle raging outside. His job was to maintain the distress signal and monitor all frequencies. Suddenly, his equipment detected a new transmission, strong and clear. This is Admiral John Blackwell of the Earth Defense Force 6th Fleet to New Haven Colony. We receive your message. Hold fast. We've come to bring you home. Hank stared at the console in disbelief. Sir, he called into his comm unit, you need to hear this. In the central square, Greg was directing the retreat to the administration building when his comm unit crackled with Hank's excited voice. He listened for a moment, then looked up at the sky. Everyone, he shouted, Earth has come. As if to confirm his words, the morning sky above New Haven lit up with brilliant flashes of light. The sounds of orbital combat reached them seconds later, distant thunder rolling across the clouds. The Corvin soldiers paused in their advance, receiving new orders from their commanders. Patrick joined Greg, looking upward. "Is it true?" he asked. Greg nodded, tears forming in his eyes. "Listen." He held up his comm unit so Patrick could hear Admiral Blackwell's message repeating on all frequencies. Around them, exhausted colonists began to cheer. Some wept openly. Others simply stared at the sky in wonder. Lisa grasped Greg's arm. "You were right all along," she said softly. Someone was listening. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in months, the people of New Haven Colony dared to hope. Earth's fleet moved with deadly precision. Admiral Blackwell had divided his ships into 3 battle groups. The first targeted the nearest Corvin vessels. The second positioned themselves between the planet and the enemy. The third prepared to launch dropships with troops and supplies. "Target locked on the 3 forward enemy vessels," reported the weapons officer on the Valiant. "Fire," Blackwell ordered calmly. Dozens of energy beams lanced out from Earth's destroyers, striking the Corvin ships simultaneously. The coordinated barrage overwhelmed the alien shields. One Corvin vessel erupted in a bright explosion. Another spun away, trailing debris and atmosphere. Commander Kate Russell coordinated the fighter squadrons from her tactical station. Blue Squadron, focus on their communications array. Red Squadron, protect our troop transports during descent. Hundreds of smaller craft deployed from Earth's carriers, swarming toward the Corvin fleet. The alien vessels, designed for planetary bombardment rather than ship-to-ship combat, struggled to track the faster Earth fighters. On the Corvin command ship, Overlord Vexkar watched his tactical display with growing alarm. 2 ships destroyed already, 3 more heavily damaged. The human fleet was unlike anything the Corvins had encountered in this sector. "Order ground forces to secure high-value prisoners," he commanded. "If we cannot hold this world, we will take hostages." His communications officer worked frantically. "Our signals to the surface are being jammed, Overlord." Vexkar slammed a fist on his command chair. "Break through the interference. Our troops must know we are under attack." In Earth's fleet, Captain Ben Howard prepared his Marines for deployment. 5,000 troops in full combat armor waited in dropships across multiple vessels. "This is not a rescue mission anymore," Howard told his officers. "This is a liberation. The Corvins have attacked our people, and we will show them exactly why that was a mistake." The Marines cheered. Many had watched recordings of the colony's distress signal, heard the desperation in the voices of fellow humans fighting alone on a distant world. "First wave launches in 5 minutes, Howard continued. "Our objective is to establish a secure landing zone and push outward to relieve the colony's defenders." Back on New Haven, the colonists watched in awe as bright streaks crisscrossed the sky. The orbital battle was visible even in daylight. Flashes of weapons fire, explosions, and the burning trails of damaged ships entering atmosphere. Greg organized search teams to find colonists who had been cut off during the battle. With the Corvin ground forces temporarily confused by their loss of orbital support, the defenders had a brief respite. "We need to consolidate our position," Patrick advised, studying a map of the settlement. "The Earth forces will need somewhere clear to land." Lisa pointed to the western agricultural fields. "Here, it's open, defensible, and only 2 miles from the main settlement." Greg nodded. "Good. Patrick, take everyone who can still fight and secure that area. I'll coordinate from here and organize the wounded for evacuation." As they discussed plans, Susan Cooper arrived from the medical center, looking exhausted but determined. "We've stabilized the critical cases, but we need better medical supplies and equipment." "Earth is bringing everything we need," Greg assured her. "We just have to hold out a little longer." In orbit, Admiral Blackwell watched as the first wave of Marine dropships broke through atmosphere. Ground-based Corvin weapons fired at them, but the dropship's defensive systems absorbed or evaded most attacks. "The landing zone is hot," reported Lieutenant Dixon. "Corvin forces are moving to intercept our Marines." Blackwell's expression remained calm. Authorize precision orbital strikes on those Corvin concentrations. Keep our people safe. The Valiant's weapon systems locked onto the alien troop formations. Moments later, targeted energy beams struck the planet's surface, creating precise explosions that scattered the Corvin forces while avoiding civilian structures. On the surface, Greg and the colonists saw bright lines connect sky to ground, followed by distant explosions. Earth is clearing the landing zone, Greg explained to those around him. People who had been fighting for their lives just hours before now looked up with expressions of wonder and relief. For 30 years they had been part of Earth's most distant outpost. For 3 years they had been completely cut off. Now Earth had come for them with its full might. The first marine dropships appeared as dots growing larger against the clouds. Their engines roared as they approached the landing zone Patrick and his team had started to secure. "I never thought I'd see this day," Lisa said, standing beside Greg at the observation post. Greg smiled for the first time in months. "I never stopped believing someone would come." The dropships touched down in the western fields, ramps dropping to reveal Earth's Marines in combat armor. They deployed rapidly, establishing a perimeter and setting up defensive positions. More ships descended behind them, carrying vehicles, supplies, and medical equipment. After 3 years of silence, Earth and New Haven were reunited. Captain Ben Howard stepped onto New Haven soil for the first time. His Marine unit had secured a 2-mile perimeter around the landing zone, pushing back the confused Corvin forces. More dropships landed every few minutes, bringing additional troops and equipment. "Establish the command post here," Howard ordered, pointing to a flat area where engineers were already setting up prefabricated structures. "I want communications with the colony leaders within the hour." Major Sam Hayes approached with the latest tactical updates. "Corvins are regrouping at these 3 locations," he said, showing Howard a digital map. "They're digging in rather than retreating." Howard studied the positions. "They're trying to hold ground between us and the colony's main settlement. We'll need to clear them out before we can reach the civilians." A Marine sergeant jogged up to them. "Sir, we've made contact with the colony's defense leader, someone named Patrick Miller. He and a small group are approaching our western checkpoint." Howard nodded. "I'll meet them personally." At the checkpoint, Patrick waited with Lisa and 4 armed colonists. They watched in amazement as Earth's military machinery deployed around them. Armored vehicles rolled off transport ships. Medical teams set up field hospitals. Supply drones flew overhead, mapping the terrain. Howard arrived and removed his helmet. "Captain Ben Howard, Earth Defense Force Marines. You must be Patrick Miller." Patrick stepped forward to shake his hand. "Yes, sir. This is Lisa Ward, our chief engineer. You people have held out against impossible odds," Howard said with genuine respect. "Now we're here to finish what you started." Lisa looked at the dropships continuing to land. "We never expected anything like this." "Earth takes care of its own," Howard replied. "Let's get you to the command post. We need to coordinate our efforts to reach your main settlement." At the hastily constructed command center, Howard spread out detailed tactical maps. Greg Porter had arrived from the colony, and together with Patrick and Lisa, they studied the situation. "We've brought supplies, weapons, and medical equipment," Howard explained. "Our primary mission is evacuation, but Admiral Blackwell has authorized a full offensive to secure this system permanently." Greg looked surprised. "Evacuation? This has been our home for 30 years, Captain." Howard nodded. "That's why we need to push the Corvins back decisively. Earth isn't abandoning New Haven again. Once we secure the planet, you'll have the choice to stay with proper defenses or return to Earth." Lisa studied the maps. "The Corvins have set up strong points in these residential areas," she said, pointing to several locations. "There are still colonists trapped there." "That's our first priority then," Howard decided. "We'll send in special teams to extract civilians before the main advance." Over the next 6 hours, Earth's Marines and the colony's defenders worked together to plan their counterattack. Medical teams from the fleet reached the colony's makeshift hospital, bringing advanced equipment and supplies. Susan Cooper worked alongside Earth doctors, finally able to properly treat the wounded. "I've never seen medical technology like this," she told one of the Earth physicians as they used a portable regeneration unit on a badly burned colonist. "A lot has changed in the last few years," the doctor replied. "We've had some contact with friendly alien species who shared medical advances with us." Outside the settlement, the Corvins had recovered from their initial confusion. They established defensive lines between the Earth landing zone and the colony. Their remaining ships in orbit had pulled back to a higher position, out of range of Earth's main weapons but still present. Howard led Greg and Patrick to a ridge overlooking the Corvin positions. Through binoculars, they could see the aliens reinforcing their defenses. "We'll begin our main push at dawn," Howard explained. "Dropships will deploy Marines behind their lines, while our ground forces advance from this position." "What about the colonists still trapped in occupied areas?" Greg asked. "That's where your people come in," Howard said. "We need guides who know the settlement layout. Our special forces will go in tonight, before the main attack, to get those people out." Marine Sergeant Alicia Nelson approached them. "Captain, my team is ready for the extraction mission." Howard introduced her to Greg and Patrick. "Sergeant Nelson leads one of our best special operations units. She'll be taking volunteers from your security team." Nelson shook their hands. "We'll get your people out safely, I promise." As night fell over New Haven, a new sense of purpose filled the colony. For the first time in months, they were not simply fighting to survive. They were fighting to reclaim their home. In the communications center, now enhanced with Earth's technology, Greg sent a message to all colonists. "Hold on just a little longer. Earth has not forgotten us. Together, we will take back New Haven." Night operations began under cover of darkness. Sergeant Nelson led 3 teams of Marines and colonial guides through the narrow passages between buildings. They moved silently, using advanced stealth technology that masked their heat signatures from Corvin sensors. "2 guards ahead," whispered Jeff Burns, a colonist who knew every shortcut in the settlement. He had volunteered to guide Nelson's team. Nelson signaled her Marines to hold position. Through her night vision goggles, she saw the tall Corvin soldiers standing outside a housing complex where colonists were being held. "Taking them both," she murmured into her comm unit. 2 Marines moved forward, their specialized weapons making only soft whooshing sounds. The Corvin guards collapsed without raising an alarm. Across the settlement, similar teams were penetrating Corvin positions. Their mission was clear: extract trapped colonists and gather intelligence on enemy defenses before the main attack at dawn. Nelson's team entered the housing complex. Inside, they found 27 colonists huddled in the common area, guarded by a single Corvin. Jeff approached the frightened people after the guard was neutralized. "We're with Earth's military," he told them. "We're getting you out of here." An older woman stepped forward. "There are more of us in the next building. At least 30. Nelson consulted her tactical map. "That's our next stop. Can everyone here walk?" They could. The team moved quickly, guiding the freed colonists through the passages toward the secured area, where Earth's forces had established their perimeter. By midnight, over 200 colonists had been rescued from various holding areas. Each provided valuable information about Corvin positions and numbers. In the command center, Captain Howard and Major Hayes updated their battle plans based on this new intelligence. "The Corvins have concentrated their forces here and here," Hayes said, marking locations on the digital map. "They're expecting our main thrust from the west, where our landing zone is." Howard nodded. "Then we give them what they expect, and more. We'll send our primary force directly at their strongest position, while 2 smaller groups flank from north and south." Greg and Patrick contributed their knowledge of the terrain. Lisa studied the Corvin defensive patterns with a thoughtful expression. "There's something about their deployment," she said finally. "They're positioning their troops in very specific formations around certain areas." Susan Cooper, who had joined the meeting after stabilizing her patients, looked at the map. "Those are all areas with environmental control stations." Howard looked interested. What exactly do these stations do? They regulate our atmosphere processors, Lisa explained. New Haven's air isn't naturally breathable for humans. We modified it over years using these stations. Susan's eyes widened with sudden understanding. That could be it. We've noticed the Corvins using breathing apparatus when their helmets are damaged. Maybe New Haven's atmosphere isn't ideal for them either. Can we use that? Howard asked. Lisa and Susan exchanged glances. Maybe, Lisa said slowly, if we could adjust the atmospheric composition in certain areas. We could make them uncomfortable without harming our people, Susan finished. The idea took shape quickly. If the Corvins were sensitive to certain atmospheric conditions, the colony's environmental systems could be modified to create areas that would impair the aliens' fighting ability. Lisa worked through the night with Earth engineers to make the necessary adjustments. The plan was simple but required precise timing. When the battle began at dawn, they would gradually increase certain compounds in the atmosphere around key Corvin positions. In orbit, the balance of power had shifted decisively in Earth's favor. 4 Corvin warships had been destroyed, and 3 more severely damaged. The remaining vessels retreated to the edge of the system, but showed no signs of leaving completely. Admiral Blackwell received a priority communication from Overlord Vexkar. The Corvin commander's image appeared on the Valiant's main screen. The Corvin hegemony does not recognize your claim to this world, Vexkar stated, his 4 arms moving in what Blackwell's cultural officers identified as gestures of defiance. Withdraw your forces immediately. Blackwell remained calm. This colony was established by Earth 30 years ago. Your invasion violated our sovereign territory, but I'm authorized to offer terms for your withdrawal. Vexkar seemed surprised by this response. What terms? Withdraw all forces from this system. Return any captured colonists unharmed. In exchange, we will not pursue your fleet beyond this system's boundary. The Corvin commander considered this. I must consult with my superiors. As dawn approached on New Haven, Earth's forces prepared for battle. Marines checked their weapons. Armored vehicles moved into position. Medical teams stood ready. But the colonists and their Earth allies now had more than just weapons on their side. They had knowledge, and a plan to use New Haven itself against the invaders.